in a world filled to the brim with boiled beverages. One could easily go insane at the sheer number of options at his or her disposal. A wise man once said to be British is to drink tea. And with deep roots going all the way back to the 16th century, it's no wonder Brits are so obsessed with this hot drink. Today, we've come to London, England's capital city, with an astounding 8.9 million population and overflowing with tea history. And with me, Mike Bunston, OBE, Chair of the London Tea History Association, Managing Director of Wilson Smith & Co, Tea Advisor and Honorary Chairman of the International Tea Committee 1993 to 2013. It's safe to say one could write an absurd sum of pages on Mike's contribution to tea. But instead, Mike will be guiding us through some of London's most iconic sites of tea business to give us the full rundown. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, Charlie.
So, Mike, are you up to the task?
I am, very much, Charlie.
For as long as is conceivable, Londoners have had a steamy love affair with the country's most popular hot beverage. The first tea in England was brought from China by the East India Company and was initially sold in a coffee house owned by one Thomas Garway in Exchange Alley in the City of London between 1657 and 1658. During the Industrial Revolution, tea became more readily available, adding milk and sugar to create what we know and love today.
Let the tea brew for 5 to 10 minutes before serving. Excellent!
The chocolate biscuit at last didn't rock up until 1925.
We begin our journey off the tube at Bank towards our first stop at Leadenhall Market, a regular locale for Mike back in the day.
Have you ever been to Leadenhall Market?
No, I haven't actually.
Well, you'll like it, it's a treat.
Yeah, is it?
So we'd come here quite often, but there's a very nice pub called The Lamb.
So how often would you eat at the Lamb Tavern
Oh,
then?
not very often.
Not very often.
Well, what would happen was, you wouldn't eat there very often, but I'd often with one of my senior partners, I wasn't a partner in those days, we'd come, because we'd been tasting all morning, we'd nip over here and have a sandwich and a beer here in the bar. Yeah. And we did that quite often.
Do you find it like refresh the palate a bit to go off and have a break and have some lunch?
I think, as I say, it was very traditional to have breaks in those days. This is the thing.
I have to say that this is just a stunning, it's gorgeous market.
It's a fabulous building, isn't it?
Gorgeous.
Yes, I mean, Brahma certainly makes a big thing of this in the book.
Yeah.
And you can see why, can't you?
Yeah.
Moving on, we're visiting Plantation House, where Mike began his career in tea.
Was it this whole building?
Well,
what was Plantation House?
The main body was Plantation House. It wasn't quite as simple as that because on the right-hand side there was a small building adjacent called Chesterfield House, and that used to be the big Lloyd's Bank. All that area there would have been the big Lloyd's Bank, because bear in mind all the commodities were in there. Their clientele was, I mean, impressive. There were millions and millions of pounds being in and out every day there.
And were you working in Plantation House every day?
Yes, that was where we were. We were through the old Plantation House, up on the second floor, and so many of the first-hand brokers were there. They were all commodity companies, but majority tea, and of course the auction room.
So for people who don't know about Plantation House, what was it as a building? What did it function as?
It was a head building for all the commodity trades. So you had the tea auctions, you had the rubber exchange, you had the coffee terminal market, the sugar terminal market, you name them all, they were all there. But the major ones were the rubber and the tea.
And how long have the auctions been running there for?
Well, of course, they started before the war, because J.J. Bunting built the building in 1935. But then through the war, of course, the auction ceased because tea was rationed and it was all under government control. So the first auctions, again, were in 1953. And I joined in 1959, so they were going in full flow then. And all the 10 years I was here until we finished in 1970, every week, apart from bank holidays, there was an auction here, 3 days a week.
And all these commodities then, where were they coming from in the world? Were they from all over the world?
Well, of course, the only things that were nothing sat physically here, only samples. But the tea all were in the warehouses, which we'll see later, or where they were.
So were all the commodities that were being auctioned here, would they have all sat in warehouses down on the docks, essentially?
Well, of course, if you're dealing with rubber, it was a lot of, they had futures markets, don't forget. So they weren't actually dealing with a physical commodity at all. They were trading pieces of paper. That was the joy I thought about the tea auction, that it was real. We were auctioning actual chests of tea, and in a busy week, that could have been 60 to 80,000 chests of tea a week.
Wow,
an awful lot of tea.
Awful lot of tea.
A tenth of what's was in Banbury Warehouse at the time, is worth saying.
What do you remember from the building before it was demolished? Like, what was it like as a building to work in?
Incredibly grand building, because it was all pillared and vast passageways. So you went in through these doors and you just could see all the way to the end. And there was a crossroads in the middle, so you could get out that side into Rood Lane, that side into Mincing Lane.
So you could exit
all the way through into Eastcheap. Yeah. So it was a real thoroughfare, if you like. But it was just so exciting. I couldn't believe my luck. The first day when I started in the tea trade and saw what I was going to get myself involved in, I really couldn't. And it was an absolute hub in there. They even had their own theatre ticket agency. Somebody had set up a theatre ticket agency in there, so it shows
really
how vibrant it must have been. Yeah.
So how many people do you think worked in the building?
That's a tricky one. I
Must
wouldn't
have
even
been
like to hazard a guess. It's got to be
hundreds,
hundreds, I think. Well, our company alone had about 50 or so people in those days, and we were only one of 6 of the first-hand brokers who were in the building. A lot of traders, a lot of dealers. In fact, the dealers, of course, and because bear in mind in those days the auction was packed with not only the main buyers that we know today, like Brook Bond, you know the name, they don't exist anymore. Lions, now Tetley's, Tata, and Taifu, and all of them. They were the big boys, but there were loads of small traders who were buying for re-export, a very big re-export market from the UK. I think most of the tea in America in those days, and Canada, were bought in the London auctions, and a lot in Europe. So it was a massive market. The re-export was phenomenal. So it was absolute hive of activity. And of course a very strict timetable, because one week you've got an auction, but you're already preparing for the next week's auction, and you're filling your catalogues for the following. So it was absolutely ongoing,
constant.
Never stopped, non-stop. And there was no time.
How were you able to take a holiday? Were there enough people to?
Well, everybody was allowed 2 weeks holiday. I think I got it after my first year. Yeah. And it was 2 weeks holiday for years, 8 years. I can't remember when it changed. It would be well into the 70s, I think. Yes. But I was here for 10 years till we had to go. And the reason, quite simply, was the landlords had upped all the rents. I mean, it's a familiar story, isn't it? And all the wealthy bankers from the Asia and the Middle East were coming in and taking the space because they could afford it. We poor old commodity brokers couldn't afford it at all. So we had to find another building, hence the reason that we ended up in Sir John Lyne House, which I'll tell you all about later.
Brilliant.
Next stop, Mincing Lane, the old location of one of London's leading tea brokers.
This was 41 Mincing Lane, and one of the leading tea brokers, William James and Henry Thompson, still now going as Thompson Lloyd, were there, based there. Where this Dunster Court was Dunster House, and there were a lot of major tea producing companies there. The Laurie Duncan group.
How many companies would have been there?
Well, all sorts, and again, obviously a lot of other commodities. But the tea boys, the big one was Duncan Laurie, as I say, which is now the Camellia Group. They had a whole load of offices there, and there were other offshoots because so many of these companies got taken over or amalgamated, so it all came down. But there were loads of smaller companies there. And then beyond that you had Colonial House. Yeah. And there again you had tea companies, Stan San, which is a name.
So where would Colonial House have been? Further up here, on the corner?
Roughly where that glass is. Yeah. And then right at the end, 21 Mincing Lane, which was where the old commercial sale rooms were, where the auctions used to be before Plantation House.
Oh, okay, before, okay.
Yes, that was
So it didn't move very far?
No, not at all. I think it made sense, really. And 21 Mincing Lane, the two major companies that were there, tea companies, was Colombo Commercial's head office, who of course had agents for a lot of Ceylon estates and produced tea machinery in the lot, and George Williamson, who became Williamson Magor, and were the biggest Indian producer. Well, they weren't. It was debatable whether the Camellia Group or Williamson Magor, or George Williamson became Williamson Magor, they were the two biggest Indian tea producing companies without any shadow of doubt. But as I say, many other companies, and then in those days you could go through any of those buildings, come out the other side into Mark Lane, and then there was a building called Market Building, and that housed, among other things, Meriden Tea Company, who were Typhoo, basically. They were the London agents for
So,
Typhoo.
so back then, what would have been the biggest tea producing companies and where would they have been based around here?
Well, as I say, really,
Yeah.
it would have been the Lorry Group and Williamson Magor and Columba Commercial.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a lot of the other salon estates had smaller offices. And I can show you in Rood Lane where the Eastern Produce lot started. They owned and were agents for a number of salon estates. The Scottish Tinlands, Cotton Valley, had a whole load. So it was all around us. I mean, this is the thing, all the time it's going. But I say the Indian ones here were the ones. But going back to market buildings, so Sidney S. Smith, who were the buying brokers for Brook Bond, and had their own catalogue as well. And they were doing, bear in mind, they were sitting in the auction buying for Lipton's, or Allied Supplies it was called then, Lyons and Brook Bond. So the guy who was bidding for them was really earning his money because he was having to take bids from all these guys all around him. It was an odd situation how they managed to get that chunk of business because probably it accounted for 70% of the purchases in any one week, I would think.
Wow.
And then you had a company called J.W. Clark. They were buying broker through in market buildings. And they would sit and they'd have accounts. They had the co-op, or they had some of the co-op business.
So obviously today this is quite a large building. Before, what was it like before? Was it similar to these older buildings?
Yes.
And were they?
Well, it was a red brick. Dunstan House was a red brick building, modern in its time. You know, I don't know when it was built. Whether it was built just before the war, possibly. And it looked big. So it was a whole continuation of buildings. You know, there was no gaps between. So you went from.
And how many floors? How many floors do you think it
about
was?
7, I think.
7 floors. Okay, so it was a very large building.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For its time. Yes.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind we're talking about the 50s, late 50s. I think 21 Mincing Lane was a little. I think they had an extra floor, but they're all about 7, 8 stories. That was as Plantation House was. You see, the auction room was on the 7th and 8th floor. So they're all very similar. Whether they were restricted by the city corporation the height, I think they probably would have been. I mean, today with St Paul's heights, where nobody can build on the river more than so many. Stories for that reason, because they want to
retain the crowds,
Well, if you go to the South Bank, as we're going later, you see the view up Millennium Bridge to St Paul's. It looks absolutely staggering. Yeah. And they've kept it like that, thank goodness. And thank God we've got a city corporation who do worry about these things. But they've got to be commercial as well, hence all these new buildings going up. Absolutely. But I think the balance is probably about right overall. And this is an extraordinary building, and we couldn't believe what they were building. It's so grand, isn't it?
So do you remember when this building was built?
Well, yes, it would have been. I mean, after Plantation House closed, everything started to change, and I think it was probably a similar time, really. Yeah. I think this was built before Plantation Place was built, but not long
So when was Plantation House closed? What year?
Well, as I say, tea trade we look upon as being 1970, but of course it was going for a lot longer. Yeah. And I forget it would have probably been in the late 80s when they started to demolish it and build.
Okay, so it had a bit more of a life after the tea trade.
Around halfway through our tea journey, I decide it's time to give Mike a cup of tea in a place he won't soon forget.
So Mike, we've got a bit of a surprise for you today. We wanted, as a way of saying thank you for this wonderful tour you've brought us on, we've actually organised some tea by the Thames. So we thought it might be a cup of tea you've never had, one quite like it. And not only are we going to pour it here, but we're going to brew it right in front of the tower.
Yeah.
Tea by the Thames, by the tower. So all the teas.
Oh,
so I'll just start.
Charlie.
We've got a pack of good things in here. You'll be impressed. I've got.
Oh my goodness me, the best china.
Now we have to hope that the hot water's still hot. Makes much more sense to brew your tea before you leave the house.
Never mind. There's a reason for this one.
How long should we brew for? There we go. Now we're brewing.
Let's do it.
I would say that, funny enough, you're not supposed to boil water in the morning and then travel with it for 6 hours in a thermos flask.
No. I mean, it's a brave thing to do, but there's a reason for it, and it's lovely, and I'm very touched, Charlie.
Here's a question. Do you think this is a cup of tea the most prominent landmark you've ever had a cup of tea at?
Pretty well, I was thinking.
I mean, if you look how much is around us right now.
Yes, the history around us here makes 350 years of tea history here seem quite modest compared with a tower that's 1,000 years old, isn't it? But there you go, it's all relative.
And we're having a cup of tea at -3 degrees.
Yes,
and we're brewing at -3 as well.
A new one. That is a new one, I must say. But there's always a first time for everything, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Oh, look at that. Wonderful.
Lovely.
Absolutely wonderful.
Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, Charlie. Good health. With tea, it will be good health.
Oh, lovely.
Delicious.
Lovely Assam.
Couldn't come at a better time, could it? As you say, -3 degrees. What's better than a cup of tea?
I mean, I'm surprised it brewed and it is
Yes,
warm.
it has.
And it's enjoyable.
Yes.
I'll tell you what, it's actually enjoyable. It's a nice cup of tea. I'm actually quite impressed we did this
I think it's probably even more enjoyable.
because of the -3 degrees.
Now that our stomachs are filled with surprisingly warm tea, we continue our trip heading for St Catherine Docks, the arrival point for so much of London's tea.
So here we are,
Here we are.
St Catherine Docks.
Catherine Dock, no less. And we're walking down onto Commodity Quay, which speaks for itself.
So, explain to us what was St Catherine Docks?
Well, it was one of the oldest docks, and of course it was very famous at the time of the tea clippers because they would all be racing up to get their first season's China tea to London to the auctions, and the first ones then got the best price naturally, and there was great bonuses for the skipper and all the rest of it. So they came up here and they would have been unloaded and been put into warehousing around here. Basically that's the simple truth of it. I don't
So
think
the warehouses have all looked like this building in the centre?
Yes, that's very typical of a warehouse, tea warehouses, and of course all down the river, north and south.
So would you have come down to the docks very often, or?
I used to come down with the tea inspectors, mainly to the warehouses. So one would be going we go over the bridge to Hayes Wharf, to Butlers, Orient Bonded. There are a number of warehouses all the way up and down. Really, this was when I was training, to go see what they did. Sampling the tea chests, as you know, in the tea collection. We've got it all there, the paraphernalia. Sampling the teas, laying them out, checking for consistency, and then packing them up, and then they would go off to the tea clearinghouse to be delivered to the various offices that they needed to go to.
So this is one of how many plaques in London?
Well, there are 3. There's this one. There's the one at Sir John Lyon House, which we'll visit later, and the one which sadly we can't see at the moment, the tea building up in Shoreditch High Street, which was the old building of, Lipton building where they did all their tea buying for years. It was opened in 1935. Staggering thing was that it still survives in its original, although it's all high-tech short loans, short leases now. They've kept the facade of the building, and it is actually called the Tea Building. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that's.
The one we're still lacking is Plantation House, and or Plantation Place as it is now, but was Plantation House. Whether we shall get it, we don't know. But
And what is the plaque commemorating then? Talk us through that.
well, it's commemorating the history of the tea industry, the 335 years or more now that it's been involved in the City of London, and what the trades were. It gives a very brief, but I think very detailed description of what went on. There's a lot of interesting figures there about the amount of tea that was stored in the warehouses, considerable amounts of tea, and as I said earlier, the amount of tea that's sold every week in the London tea auctions, which at the height of the season could have been 60 to 80,000 chests per week. It needed a lot of storage, you can imagine, for all of that. And so I think that's
vast
says it
number
all.
of tea
Yes.
chests.
And we were very lucky that James Finlay actually funded this particular plaque. A very generous gesture, now part of the Swire Group. So yes, we're very proud of that. It's in a good place.
Nearby, we stop at Tower Bridge, with an excellent view of the Pool of London, where dozens of tea warehouses once existed.
I guess this is a good view from the river because you can really see.
It's a very good view.
I don't know why this area was so.
And
I
it's
know, useful
very good.
as a dock.
It's very good that they did have the foresight to maintain it. Even though it's all smart flats and restaurants and all the rest of it, it's still got the look that I remember as a young lad. Rather smart, I might say, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And imagine all the tea coming down the barges down the river and all being loaded into there.
So with the tide, how would they have like jetties like this to get
I
things?
suspect to a degree they had to work with the tide.
Yeah, so they'd use cranes and things.
Yes,
And
I
so
think.
would they load straight from the river then straight into all the warehouses?
Yes, they would tie up with the, there's all the places where you could see them from here, where you would tie up the barges, secure them, and then they would, it was manhandled out of the barges, and then it would go into the cranes to get up to the upper floors.
Well, and there'd be a lot of people working in these warehouses then.
The
yeah.
amount of them. Hundreds and hundreds of them. I mean, it's a massive form of employment for all these guys in the East End, you know.
One brisk walk later, and we arrive at our final destination, Sir John Lyon House, Mike's previous place of work.
So Mike, tell us where we are now.
Well, we're on the south bank and we're looking straight north. Obviously St Paul's Cathedral is there, but to the right, down on the river, the building that is rather weird shades of orange and I don't know what, was where Sir John Lyon House was. It's called Sir John Lyon House still, but it's now some very luxury flats. And we were there for 30 years.
So give us a bit of a background to Sir John Lyon's house.
First, I will, but first, just to say, on the right of it is Brooks Wharf, which was, again, mainly a tea warehouse, and there was tea actually stored there when we moved into Sir John Lyon House in 1970. Yes, why is it called Sir John Lyon House? That used to be the Lyon Wharf, and it was owned by Sir John Lyon, who was, there's some debate about whether it was he or whether it was a brother, who set up Harrow School. But of course, his name was given to the lower school of John Lyon. But I think his brother was Lord Mayor. He never made Lord Mayor, but he was a very wealthy city merchant, and as I say, he had his own wharf there, and that was the story. And so, when it was demolished, they had to do something. They built this building, called it Sir John Lyon House, and it was an odd one because it had to be let totally as a whole. There was no part letting. So we had to set up Tea Trade Properties, and we were all shareholders in Tea Trade Properties to hold the head lease for 25 years. And that with a 5-year option, which not everybody took, but we did. So we were there for fully 30 years. And it was wonderful. I mean, there we were. My desk was right on the window on the 4th floor, looking down to the Houses of Parliament that way, Tower Bridge that way. In the time we were there, we saw the Globe being built, the Millennium Bridge being built, the whole of the London Eye being taken down piecemeal to be erected. I mean, there was always something going on.
So how long did you work at Sir John Lyon House?
30 years.
30 years. And what was the last year you were kind of working there?
2000. We left in June, end of June 2000, when our lease was finally up. Although the International Tea Committee stayed on, which I was chairman of, for another 5 years on that, with the building being almost demolished around it. It was not a satisfactory thing, but we had to do it.
And around this area, how much of it would have been warehousing then at that time when you were there?
Nothing, it was all closing down.
By that point.
I think Brooks was the last one to have any tea in it. They'd all gone either further down the river, or Banbury had started, or some of them were down in Avonmouth, but they realised that wasn't the place to be. They all verged on Felixstowe, because by then all the container ships were coming into Felixstowe. Because of the East Coast being next stop before the continent. And if you're stuck in Bristol, you're miles from nowhere, aren't you, really? So it all made sound sense. It's the way it moved, and we had to move with it, and we did. So every phase had its fascinating times, no doubt about it. And we did wind the auctions down very gently, very delicately, and I think we went out, I wouldn't say a blaze of glory, but we went out with dignity. I think that's the word to use.
Well said.
I came into various different stations over the period. More of the time was Mansion House station out there, but occasionally I'd come to St Paul's and walk through. But this was where I ended up, over there, down the bridge, and there I was, Sir John Lyon House.
So last time we were here, you talked a bit about bomb sites in the city.
Yes, yes, I mean, all over. And when I used to, at one stage, I came in from Aldgate, which is way up beyond the Barbican, and that was in the very early days, I mean, early 60s. And that was long before the Barbican was built, and it was basically bomb sites, or very heavily bombed buildings. And in the summer, buddleia growing everywhere, as it does. And even around here, there were the odd sites that were still derelict. So yes, it was. Well, I say it was depressing. I mean, I'd known nothing different, of course, being brought up in the war.
And did it take a long time for them to reconstruct?
It didn't. I mean, Barbican, once it started, came up very quickly, and it's an incredible place now. Some of the other ones, I guess there were all reasons why they couldn't do it in a hurry, but it all got done in the end. And of course, the miracle was that places like these churches didn't get hit. Or St Paul's, of course. I mean, so many places could have been hit but weren't. But no, that was the way it was. So no, you just accepted what you had. I think you did in those days. But it all, as we can see now, it's all come right.
Yeah, it's funny to imagine a bomb site here nowadays.
I know.
It's shocking.
I know, absolutely. So Charlie, thanks. You've really
Thank you,
taken me
Mike,
on a
yeah.
trip of nostalgia today.
Thank you for
And I hope
today.
I've been able to fill you in on a few blanks that you had.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much.